Hi, this is Danielle Stewart, the ESL coordinator, and I am going to go over with you as a tutorial how to fill out the Russellville School District 9-week ESL action plan. This used to be known as failure conference paperwork. This form is filled out each 9 weeks for elementary or secondary students that are ESL, that are either transition or direct service students, not for the monitored students, that fall into that below basic or F range. So if an ESL student is listed as monitored, you do not have to complete this paperwork. If a student is listed as direct service or transition, you do have to complete the paperwork. If you have any questions about which of your students are ESL, for secondary you can refer to the ESL database. It's actually a shared Google Doc that updates automatically. And so if you will go to your shared documents and you look for it, you do a search for ESL database, it'll be there, and you can look and see which students you have that are ESL and what their accommodations and modifications are. For elementary, your building level ESL staff member will have probably given you either a copy of the student's LPAC or a document with all of the students that you have and their accommodations and modifications. So one of the common questions that I get is, when am I supposed to begin an ESL action plan? If you notice right here, it says that the first contact is when a student falls into the below basic or F range. A very good fallback plan is if you know that a student is getting dangerously close to that below basic or F range, even if they're at risk, go ahead and start the conference, because that way you can show that you are doing the proper accommodations and modifications and that you have an action plan for helping this ESL student. It is very important that you start that ESL action plan as soon as that grade falls into that range, not once the 9 weeks is over. Because this is an action plan per 9 weeks, we don't want the failure conference paperwork to start after the 9 weeks has already ended, because really, if you think about it, that's the last, it's too late for the student to do anything on the action plan because it's already completed, the grade is already completed. And also, we don't want our parents' first time to ever hear that their student is failing be after the grades are already finalized. So we want to be proactive in that. I know for secondary sometimes, a student can not be failing until maybe they miss a semester test, and then they are. That's fine. As soon as the student falls or gets close to that range, begin the paperwork. If a student has a very low grade all 9 weeks, but the first time we contact the parent is after the grades are already due, we haven't done our due diligence. So the first thing is, as a classroom teacher of ESL students, you need to make sure that you know what your students' modifications or accommodations are, if they have any. So I would definitely keep a sampling of those. Say you give a test that has cut down answer choices, or you read a test to a student, keep some documentation that you've done those things so you can attach it to the ESL action plan. Moving on to number 2, notification of the building level ESL staff must occur first. So when the student does fall into that range or gets close and you want to go ahead and start this failure conference paperwork, go ahead and let your building level ESL staff know. If you have any questions about who that staff member is, say you're a new teacher and you're still learning the staff members at your building, just shoot me an email at danielle.stewart@russellvilleschools.net, and I will let you know who your building level person is. But that ESL staff member at the building really needs to be involved in that failure conference paperwork and building that plan, and I'll show you in a second what that looks like when you're filling it out. Number 3, the first contact for the parent. As soon as the kid falls into that range or gets close, go ahead and start it. It has to be two-way communication. It used to be where you had to have a parent come, sit there, sign the papers, but I've changed it to just establish two-way communication. It can be an email, but it has to have a response, or a call log with notes of what the parent said, face-to-face meeting. It could be a parent-teacher conference if that's the first time. I'm not talking about parent-teacher conferences at the end of the 9 weeks. I'm talking about a parent-teacher conference that occurs earlier. It could be an SST or an RTI meeting, or a letter sent home with a returned parent signature. I really want you to establish two-way communication. So sometimes the questions that occur are, well, what if the parent doesn't speak English? Well, at the top you can see that there are instructions for who to contact, Marcela.Estrada. if it's Spanish, and if it's another language, you can contact Toby. What if I emailed and I didn't get a response? Well, then we need to send a letter home in the native language and make sure that the parents know of a meeting. We need to pretty much exhaust this list because typically the parents of ESL students are involved, and they will come if the student has parents available to come. The second contact should be a student follow-up. So even in elementary, just meet with that student 5 days later after that first conference. Talk about, okay, what are you doing better? What do we still need to work on? For elementary, it's going to be more of a, let's make sure we're doing these things. For secondary, it needs to be a little more strict, and you also, for secondary, need to have the students sign that they understand what they still have to do to make sure their grades are brought up. This is not simply to make the student accountable, but it's also to make sure that all of their accommodations and modifications are being followed, and that the ESL staff member sees that all of those things are occurring in class too. So it's not just a, hey student, turn your work in. It's also specifically for teachers to make sure that we're doing what we're supposed to help the student succeed. The third contact, 5 days later or approximately, is with the parent again. You still have to establish two-way communication, so maybe another letter, maybe an email, maybe a phone call, and make sure that they understand that, hey, the student is still failing, but here's some things we need to do to get the grade up. The final conference is in-person parent, and then in secondary, the parent and student can come. It should be a parent-teacher conference. You need to have all of the paperwork there. No meeting is needed. Like if the child does not end up failing, then you don't have to complete this failure conference paperwork. Once the child is passing, you can stop with the failure conference paperwork, but I want you to go ahead and send it to me, and there will be a place on the form where you mark that the student did not end up failing. But notice this is very important, this D, and this has, typically been a step that people have been forgetting. The ESL action plan should have the signatures of the principal, the ESL coordinator, the student, if it's a secondary student, and a parent, and it should be sent to the ESL office, the ESL building staff member, and the principal. All of those should have a copy of this paperwork and have all the signatures. Sometimes I get them and the signatures are not filled out, and I have to send them back. So this is what the actual paperwork looks like. Okay, so you fill out their student name, grade, building, what 9 weeks it is, the year. All of this is pretty self-explanatory, except this one right here. Don't forget to mark this, and when you send them to me, even if they don't fail, I need this question right here marked. And then you notice, notification of building level ESL staff member, and you're to put a date right here that you emailed them and said, hey, so-and-so is not doing real well, we need to get together. Here's where you just check which kind of parent two-way communication you did, and you can attach it to the back of the paperwork like it says. And then you're going to write down here exactly what steps the student needs to take and that you maybe need to change for your classroom to make sure the student's successful. This is also an important place right here. The ESL staff member of your building should sign during that first action plan. If you have that action plan and you talk to the parent and then you want to take it to the ESL teacher to sign, or you want to have that ESL teacher involved on the front end to make sure it is a good plan, this is where that's where they sign. Second contact, this is where we talked about talking with the student. If it's secondary, the student signs. Third contact, it's the same as the first. You document two-way communication, and this one is about discussing the progress of the student. Okay, and then lastly, if the student does end up failing, then a final failure conference has to be held. Here are the mandatory attendees: the student, the parent, and the teacher. Possible attendees: if at all possible, please invite your ESL building level staff member, but then also you can invite these other people to the failure conference. If you know that your student is having trouble in multiple teachers' classes, say in secondary, you can collaborate with those teachers to have one failure conference for all of the teachers invited, but you each have to fill out your individual paperwork because that action plan for your class will look different if it's for algebra versus biology. So And then at the end, this is very important, all of these people have to sign. So to get my signature, what you'll do is either I'll be at the final failure conference, or if I'm not, you'll gather all of the signatures, and then I will be the final signature. I will review the paperwork, look at your accommodations and modifications, and if everything looks good, then I'll sign off on it. If it doesn't, then I might send it back to you or send you an email about what to fix. One of the main takeaways from this paperwork is that it is a 9 weeks action plan. So therefore, you have to restart it every 9 weeks should a student fall into that below basic or basic range. And it needs to be done as early on as possible. Please try to be proactive and not start after grades are already reported. If you have any questions about any of this or you need additional explanation, please just email me at danielle.stewart. And also, you can find this ESL action plan in your shared documents. I've shared them with all certified staff. And I have also sent this email to the principals, and they will have access to it too. If all else fails and you don't know where to find it, please just shoot me an email and I will share it with you again. No problems. All right, thank you.